while you're doing that.
Sir, Chair Archibald,
Here.
Vice Chair Levi,
Here.
Commissioner Barton,
Here.
Commissioner Mubena,
Here.
Commissioner Faircloth,
Here.
Commissioner Hoke,
Here.
and Commissioner Simmons is not here. We have a quorum.
Thank you. First item on the agenda will be the approval of the minutes from the November 2nd, 2022 meeting. Any questions, comments about that at all? If none, I will make a motion to approve those minutes. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Nope. Motion passes. We have one item on our agenda tonight that we will be continuing until date certain of January 4th. That is the request to amend the conditional zoning ordinance for property located at 254 Inca Heritage Parkway. Do I have a motion to continue that to January 4th?
I motion to continue that item number 2 on the agenda to January 4th.
All right. I'll second that. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Motion passes. All right. The next item on our agenda, or the first item now on the agenda, is a presentation from the Planning and Urban Design regarding the African American Heritage Resource Survey and the Burton Street Architectural Survey. And I believe Ms. Alex Cole will be doing that. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair Archibald and members of the commission. My name is Alex Cole. I'm the Historic Preservation Planner for our department. And I'm here today just to give a quick update on a couple of projects we've been working on and have completed recently. We don't oftentimes bring our architectural survey project completion updates to you all. You might have seen these in the press. We did present them to the African American Heritage Commission, the Historic Resources Commission, PED, and Council, but we, since we don't typically present these to the Planning and Zoning Commission, that's why you guys were missed in that cycle of presentations. But I believe Commissioner or Chair Archibald asked for an update, so I'm going to go through these slides pretty briefly, and then I'm happy to answer any questions that you all have on this work. So the first one I'm going to present on is the African American Heritage Resource Survey. This was a project that we started engaging, or work that we started engaging the community on back in 2018. This is this particular scope of work was a first phase in what will be an ongoing effort to document historic resources related to African American history in Asheville and Buncombe County. The HRC is a joint city-county body, so we are tasked with doing work throughout the county. And this is a great opportunity for us to elevate history for underrepresented communities that we haven't traditionally looked at specifically from a historic preservation lens. So we're really trying to tell a more complete and inclusive narrative of our collective history. The survey, the deliverables that come out of survey project are a pretty detailed historical narrative, as well as specific data sets that come out in terms of like looking at individual historic buildings or resources, sites, et cetera, within our built environment. And that information is used for a variety of purposes. Probably most typical, it will be historic designations that come out of those property identifications, but then they also can inform other planning projects. Didn't realize how dark it was in here. Thank you. I can see a little bit better with my old eyeballs. And as I'll talk about in a minute with the Burton Street survey, they can inform other projects that we work on in the planning department. We are actually going to draft a pattern book for the Burton Street neighborhood, and so we are going to use the architectural survey we just finished for that neighborhood to inform the pattern book. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So just a brief overview of what I'll talk through. I like to start with what specifically an architectural survey is, because a lot of folks that don't work within the field of preservation don't aren't familiar with that language. And then I'm going to talk about some background on the project, next steps, and then again, happy to answer any questions or provide any additional info to you all. So an architectural survey, I think the word survey is a little bit of a misnomer. I would say it's more of an inventory. Part of what preservation commissions are tasked with in North Carolina is maintaining an inventory of historic resources within their jurisdiction. So it's really just us physically going out into the field or hiring a consultant to go out into the field, into the community, and identify historic resources that are important to us. And those are generally considered to be places that are 50 years or older. Again, documentation or doing this type of survey is super important to maintaining historic character of our community and individual neighborhoods. It's a way that we connect with each other and our past. It's also important to, again, to informing long-range planning efforts and historic designations. So we started this work back in, so that, like I said, the Historic Resources Commission is the body that by state legislature is tasked with doing this type of work. We looked at our GIS data starting back in 2018 as we were considering kind of a bigger projects to work on under our historic preservation program. You can pretty clearly see, and I'll show you on the next slide, the GIS data available for historic resources via the State Historic Preservation Office. You can see some pretty big gaps in our historically Black neighborhoods, though where we haven't surveyed in the past. Survey work started back in the 1970s. And so we identified some, specific neighborhoods where we hadn't focused our survey work in the past. Based on just kind of like our cursory, very rough count of looking at aerials and the GIS data, we estimate that citywide there's probably about 600 resources that we have yet to survey specifically related to African American history. So we have a lot of work to do. This was, again, a first phase, recognizing that the budget that we had is pretty limited, so we didn't have a lot to cover the entire city. So we formed a focus group to help inform where the individual resources we would survey came out of. Typically, we would do it by a given area or neighborhood, but we looked at the entire city and did probably 10 or so resources within each neighborhood that was identified by the focus group. And our total project budget was only $25,200, part of which was grant funded. We contracted with Owen and Eastlake for the first round of survey back in 2019. They're a firm based out of Ohio. Again, this is just a snapshot of the Historic Preservation Office, their GIS that we use to identify areas look at where historic resources have been identified. All the blue dots and blue boundaries are National Register districts and properties, and the yellow shapes are surveyed properties. So we got the draft survey report back in 2019. Unfortunately, it was not the product we were hoping for, so we went back to the drawing board and decided to hire a local consultant to help us revise the entire report. It's a pretty lengthy report. It's almost 170 pages, so it was a lot of work. Probably would have been easier for the consultant to start from scratch, but we didn't have a budget for that. So the draft survey report was submitted to us earlier this year, and we just published it in October now. So it's out there in the world, and we hope people will read it and use it. It's a really wonderful document that gives this overarching historic narrative of African American history here, but then goes neighborhood by neighborhood and talks about the evolution of those neighborhoods and the impacts of time on those places. So it's a really useful document, as well as, I think, being extremely informative for all of us to better understand the history of our community. And the survey data, that all gets routed to the State Historic Preservation Office, and they input that into their GIS for us. So this says next steps, but we've already done these, or at least the first one. We did press releases back in October for this project and the Burton Street project, as well as publish the report. There's a link to the report here if you'd like to, are interested in reading it. And so our next step in this will be identifying the next phase of work, whether it's looking, going neighborhood by neighborhood, or perhaps there's grant opportunities that are, big enough pots of money where we could potentially go citywide and finish the survey work. So that's what we'll do next, is look at those two things. And this is just a recap of the key takeaways. I'm not going to go back through this slide, but if you all have any questions about this work, happy to answer.
Thank you, Ms. Cole. I didn't read every bit of the survey, but it was a very good, gave a lot of very good descriptions about, why Asheville looks the way it does now. And I think it's will help be very informative as, the city and this commission and other planning groups look at potentials of redevelopment in parts of our city and go, oh, what did happen here? Should we continue these kinds of things? So I have found it very, very informative, and I hope it continues to be that way for everybody.
Yeah, I think it gives a good, the information, while the report is meant to elevate African-American contributions to our community and highlight the institutions that were part of our African-American neighborhoods, it also then has obviously the layer of urban renewal built upon it, so that you can reflect on that and understand how it affected our built environment. Obviously, you can go out and physically look at it every day, but it kind of weaves those two things together in a very personal way, I think, where people can easily relate to it. And this isn't part of this presentation, but if you haven't read, we also just took through the Walton Street Park and Pool local landmark designation to City Council, which some of you may have seen in the news also. If you haven't read that designation report, I would recommend reading it too, because it really talks through how hard the Southside neighborhood and wider African-American community had to fight for that pool, and how it compares to other pools in white neighborhoods. And I think it really, probably will be eye-opening for a lot of folks. So great information to pass around if you haven't looked at it.
Yeah, even things like when I moved here in '95, the Charlotte Street was reasonably new, for Asheville, but then some of the history has come out over the years I've been here, but to really be able to dive into it more and understand it. And then again, with Burton Street and the impacts that 26 is going to have on that, I know that's been a big focus as well. So,
Right.
Yeah, thank you very much. Any questions or comments from commission members?
No, thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. Is the consultant who did the original survey doing any other surveys for us? If we spent $25,000 and it didn't work out,
No.
and I'm not attacking you, I'm just,
No, it was, I won't go into detail, but it was a fraught RFP process. We ended up being pretty limited with our proposals, I think partly because our budget was so small.
Sure.
And we did have an advisory committee, steering that through, who supported that consultant at the time. And I think we were all completely thrown by the product that we got. No, I know they contacted us actually about the Burton Street survey, and we were polite, but said, you can apply, but submit a proposal. But given our experience, we probably won't go back to that consultant. So.
Thank you, and thank you for all this work. I do appreciate that.
Sure. Thank you. Okay. So the Burton Street survey. So Todd Okolachaney, as well as other members of our staff and transportation, et cetera, our communication staff, lots of us have been engaged with the Burton Street Community Association over the past 4 or more years in relation to the mitigation plan for I-26. And as part of that, obviously the planning department's trying to shepherd put some of the goals in motion and strategies into motion and help get some of those things accomplished. There are some, and if you ever look at their plan, there's some that are designated to the DOT and some that are city, have city ownership of them. So it's our job to get those efforts done. So at some point, a pattern book was determined to be the desire of the neighborhood. That was prior to my involvement with the community association. So I couldn't really explain how that conversation exactly came about, except for that one of the concerns of the neighborhood is some of the more insensitive infill that's happening there, and that was identified or pointed out to us by the community members that have lived there for a long time, that some of the building typologies they're seeing now are not necessarily contextual with the historic character of the neighborhood. So as there's been multiple surveys for this neighborhood over the years because of the continued impacts of 26. However, we really needed a specific survey product for creating a pattern book. Most architectural surveys don't spin out this whole very detailed information, if you will, or breakouts of individual architectural styles and all of their contributing features. So that's what we really needed from this in order to adequately build the pattern book, because we are planning to do that in-house versus source it out. It's our understanding that pattern books can cost up between $60,000 and $100,000. So we want to create a digital platform or digital resource that we think we can do that in-house with the urban design capacity that we have in our department. All right, so just brief overview. I'm going to talk about background, timeline, and then where we are now. This is the background. I think I just skipped over the whole overview slide and gave you the background. But like I was saying, what the plan does include goals and strategies related to mitigating insensitive infill. We don't have a lot in North Carolina, a lot of tools that we can use to control single-family development. It's really local historic preservation overlay that does that, and that may not be desirable for every neighborhood because it can come with pros, but can also come with cons, such as higher maintenance costs for homeowners. It tends to raise property values, which can be good, but not good if people are trying to trying to prevent displacement. So that was, not the direction that the neighborhood wanted to go, understandably. So we've been looking at the idea of this pattern book and then also potentially a conservation overlay. It's one tool that we do have. It's still a little bit limiting because it's really mostly building height, setback. There's not a ton you can limit within that, but it may be something that we would still want to consider, the neighborhood would want to consider as the next step. So this is just an image with some of the more recent construction within the neighborhood. And then this is just a snapshot of some of the existing historic buildings in the district. So they partnered with us back in 2021 to work on this with them. This project was jointly funded by the Community Association and our department. The Community Association had gotten a grant from Buncombe County that they then passed on to us to help with this work. There's a link in this slide that's pretty interesting. It's for Chattanooga. They have pattern books for some of their neighborhoods, and it is a digital resource. And it's pretty cool from a graphic standpoint, woven in with interesting information about the building types and the history of the neighborhood. So that's, I think, what we're kind of going to model ours off of, and we'll probably use the Esri Story Map platform to do it. And while this won't be a binding pattern book in any way, we're hoping that even having this tool to communicate to developers in the neighborhood or potential people who are interested in building there, to bring awareness to the history of the neighborhood, as well as show them what the common building typologies are, and hopefully that will have some influence over their decision making in terms of how they develop their properties. This is just a screenshot from from the My Chat Home website that shows it's just one example of a page where they talk about different building details of a specific architectural style. So we started this back in the spring of 2021. SNME was our consultant on this project. They submitted the draft survey report to us earlier this year, and we finally got the report finalized this summer. And we will probably start working on the pattern book in early winter. I guess we're tiptoeing into winter. No, it's 60 degrees outside. So again, this slide's a little outdated, but we have already done the press release for this project and published the survey report. Is, like I said, it does have an overarching historical narrative, but it is a more technical document once you get into the individual architectural style section. And then we are going to start working on the pattern book here shortly, and we'll be doing some community engagement around that, primarily trying to find avenues to get that product out there once we're done with the pattern book, and then hopefully getting feedback on how and if people are using it once it's published. So this is just a repeat slide, but I am happy to answer questions on this project if you all have any.
Thank you,
Go ahead,
Ms.
Kim.
Cole. That was really excellent. I was wondering, what is the status for Burton Street neighborhood as far as historical designation? Is it based on the neighborhood or the building, or is this just guidelines for developers, or is it something that'll get triggered in review?
No, it's just guidelines. Like I said, we really are limited for single family. It has to have some kind of preservation overlay district added to it, which, we would support them, I think, if that's something that they wanted to pursue. But to this point, I think that's not what they want to pursue. They want to try to influence design in these other ways. And I'd be interested to see how it works. It could be a good pilot for some other neighborhoods that don't want a preservation overlay, but are also concerned about, insensitive or, whatever their concerns are about the types of infill they're seeing. I don't know if insensitive is always the right way to characterize it, and maybe not contextual. But no, there won't be a trigger for anything. It'll just be really us kind of doing some groundwork. I understand from Ben Woody, our development services director, well, now assistant city manager, but previous development services director, that there's a small scale development group that meets regularly. So we're hoping to kind of pursue meeting with that group and trying to get this out to brokers who might be helping people with lots in that neighborhood. Probably trying to engage the current property owners because there are quite a number of vacant parcels in Burton Street. So trying to, engage that group and make sure they're aware of it, so that, we're just basically doing kind of a grassroots effort, I guess, is more so what we're doing.
I know that pretty much answered my question. My question was, how does this information get to the developer? Is it a push or a pull system? And, it sounds like you're working on the push information side, so I think that's great. So,
Yeah.
If it can't be put into the guidelines of an HOA, how does that, we can't always assume the developer is going to ask all the right questions on it. So you pretty much answered my question. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And once we get this all launched next year, for those who are, still working on projects in the community and/or on this commission, we would love to hear feedback anytime on if this is, having any impact or not.
Yeah, it makes me think about the ADU guidelines, that little pamphlet that DSD has. Maybe it's something that, if anybody comes and, wants to, or is asking questions about doing a permit, it's a little bit different with single family because they usually have already done everything and they're just submitting, especially now when it's all online. But if there's some way to have it be there's some trigger of, oh, here's this, read that, then, or did you read this? Check.
Yeah, it'll be a learning process for sure, but I think we have some good ideas kind of in terms of how to get the information out. But always welcome suggestions, though, if you all think of any that we haven't come up with ourselves.
Well, and again, I think this is great. I mean, there was it seems like there have been several books about, smaller books talking about, other neighborhoods in the city. And so it's good to see that we're kind of encompassing every neighborhood, not just certain ones. So,
Yeah, no, we've really tried, our historic preservation program's pretty robust, and we've tried really hard since 2018 to, make it we really needed to shift our program and focus on some of the parts of our community that we haven't focused on specifically in the past. And so, yeah, we have a lot left to do, but we're proud to have gotten these across the finish line, the African American Heritage Survey in particular, since it took us the better part of 4 years to get it finished. So,
well, thanks for all your hard work on it and
Thank
shepherding
you.
it through.
Thank you. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. We've got only one thing left on the agenda tonight, and that is a request to conditionally rezone property located at 157 and 99999 New Leicester Highway from residential multifamily high-density RM16 and highway business HB to residential expansion conditional zone RES EXP-CZ. Properties are identified by the pins noted in the Buncombe County tax record. The property owner is Cohen Esri Development Group. The applicant contact is Warren Sugg, and the planner coordinating review is Will Palmquist. Palmquist.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Commissioners. I'll be presenting this conditional zoning petition for this properties at 157 New Leicester Highway. Here you can see the existing and proposed zoning. Existing on the left, outlined in red, is the two properties comprising the site. It's currently split zone between HB Highway Business and RM16 residential multifamily high density. And then due to the size of the proposed project, a rezoning to the residential expansion conditional zone is required. And this aerial map gives you a sense of the surrounding context of the site. You can see that it's surrounded to the northwest by multifamily residential, to the east with commercial and light industrial uses, as well as to the south along New Leicester Highway, which is a fairly busy 4-lane road. And then there's some other single-family residential uses further to the west and south. And then the dotted red line is the city-county border, so the portion of the county to the northeast of the site. The future land use map, as shown in the Living Asheville Comprehensive Plan, is a combination of two different categories: residential neighborhood, shown in the yellow, and then urban corridor, shown in the red. And no change in that designation would be required for the proposed rezoning. So this site plan shows the proposed layout of the project. The project itself consists of a new 4- and 5-story multifamily building kind of set into the slope along New Leicester Highway. That building would have 141 residential dwelling units that would be designated for senior living. 28 of those units, or 20%, would be designated affordable at 80% AMI for 20 years. There's also approximately 150 parking spaces proposed as part of the project. That number might be in flux a little bit due to some of the site constraints with aquatic buffers and other environmental features on the site. So that is kind of an estimate at this point, but the minimum identified and required would be 141 parking spaces, which is based on the number of units. Access to the site by vehicle would be off an existing curb cut on New Leicester Highway. No new sidewalks are proposed along New Leicester Highway due to the fact that there is a city project planned and funded to construct sidewalks along this section of the highway, but the applicant would be required to pay a fee in lieu for that amount of sidewalk. 5-foot wide sidewalks are proposed internal to the site. Landscaping standards apply, such as street trees, parking lots, building impact screening, and property line buffers. Open space is required at a rate of 20% of the site, which the project complies with, and tree canopy preservation standards are met on site through the preservation of existing tree canopy. This is the landscape plan, so you get a sense of the street tree plantings along New Leicester Highway, and then the various parking lot and building impacts plantings around the parking lot. One thing to mention on this plan is that the applicant is seeking a technical modification for having no type A property buffer, which is typically a 20-foot wide buffer that would exist along any residentially zoned property adjacent to the site, which would be kind of along the western side of the site, along Ascension Drive, and then this portion of the northern part of the site as well. So that is a technical modification that the applicant is requesting as part of this conditional zoning process. Here you can see the building elevations. The main building elevation along New Leicester Highway is at the bottom here. And then the ones on the top of the page, such as the side elevations, give a sense of how that site, how the building is situated into that slope of the site. And then this elevation, the second one down, shows the rear portion of the building that faces the interior of the parking lot, or of the site towards the parking lot. So as far as conditions for the project, as mentioned earlier, 20% of the units are designated to be affordable, 80% area median income for a minimum of 20 years, and half of those affordable units would accept housing choice vouchers. And then there are a few technical modifications that the project is seeking through the conditional zoning process. The first of which, as mentioned, is a modification to allow for no landscape buffer where it would be required along the western property boundary, which would be a type A 20-foot wide landscape buffer. A reduction in the required sidewalk widths internal to the site to 5 feet from the required 10-foot wide requirements, and then finally no bike lanes into the development. The project was approved with conditions at the November 21st Technical Review Committee. It is not in a design overlay or other zoning overlay, so no other reviews have been required so far. Regarding the Living Asheville Comprehensive Plan, as mentioned earlier, the project is located across two different future land use categories. And the project appears to be consistent with both of those designations. The first one being residential neighborhood, which talks about having more housing diversity, such as accessory apartments, duplexes, and other types of small-scale infill housing. And then also the urban corridor future land use designation, which talks about redevelopment in the form of mixed-use residential, commercial, and office uses that place an emphasis on pedestrian-friendly amenities and infrastructure. And the project also supports a number of goals identified in the plan, such as providing infill development in targeted growth areas, increasing the supply of housing, including affordable housing in proximity to schools, transit, and parks, and leveraging city resources for the development and maintenance of subsidized housing, including senior housing. Therefore, staff recommends approval of the proposed conditional zoning along with the attached Exhibit E project conditions. I'd be glad to answer any questions. We also have representatives of the project with us here this evening.
All right, thank you, Mr. Palmquist. One quick one. In the pre-meeting, we were talking a little bit about this and about the parking. You mentioned that so right now in the project conditions, it's saying it will include a minimum of 155 total parking spaces. Is that number going to stay, or might that
So I think the
change
latest,
before it goes to council?
correct. I think the latest version should note that a minimum of 141 spaces
Okay.
would be required. So that would be kind of the baseline, which is based off the required amount of parking per unit. but around 150 is what the applicant is shooting for.
Okay.
Still have some details to work out with site engineering and stormwater folks regarding those aquatic buffers and what could be possible or not on the site.
Okay. And actually, I misspoke. I have one other one. I did not notice on the landscape plan any retaining wall landscaping noted. Actually, you've got that up right now.
Yep.
And I didn't notice anything in the report, either staff or TRC,
Yep.
commenting on that. So,
Yes. Yeah, that sometimes is the detail worked out more in the permitting stage of the process. We don't always have that to review, but I think it's important for the applicant to know that landscaping is required for retaining walls and would be required when they go for their retaining wall permit and other site permits.
okay. All right, thank you. Any questions, comments from commissioners?
Yes, thank you, Will. I know this is schematic design, but, you know, there's only one entrance and exit to this building. I'd be surprised if the fire marshal would be happy with that. I feel like that elevation is going to have to change with more entrances and exits for there being 4, 5 levels with just one lobby entrance. I know that's not a big deal, but that will change the layout of the parking and the elevation. So
Yep.
just a little concerned about one door for a big building.
Yeah, regarding the
Unless I'm
number of
missing.
driveway entrances.
Okay.
Yep. I don't recall that being an issue. You are correct that depending on the size of the project, more than one entrance might be required for it. I can pull up the TRC report and see what the fire department noted on that. Just give me 1 second.
Wait, were you talking the building itself or the parcel?
The building.
The building, yes.
There's
okay,
I
that's-
see on building elevation 3, I see the lobby entrance and exit, and I realize that all the ground level will have entrance and exits from their units, but that's a lot of units for one listed entry point to the building. Does that
that
make
would-
sense what I'm trying to
Yes,
say?
yeah, I wanted to make sure Mr. Palmquist heard you correct.
No, thank you.
And then I
I was-
heard you correct, actually, too.
No, I mean, I'm sure the fire department's already looked at it for turnaround of their vehicles and
Yep.
getting in there. I'm not concerned about maneuverability of the vehicles in
Sure.
the parking lot, just exit strategy for
Yes.
tenants in an emergency.
Yes, I know there are requirements for emergency exits and areas of safe dispersal, I believe it's called. This is the excerpt of the building inspections portion of the technical review committee staff report. So I'm not seeing any comments regarding any code issues with the entrances.
And I mean, if it passes the code, I mean, I trust the TRC and I trust you. I realize they can't put for safety perspective, there can't be an entrance every 3 units, but
Right.
that would concern me if I lived there.
Right,
Just
sure.
a comment.
Sure. Yeah, no, your point is well taken. I believe the design meets the code or would have been flagged during TRC review. So at the minimum, it's meeting the building code based on staff's review of the project.
Okay.
And so I had a question about a potential 20-foot retaining wall within the 15-foot building setback from the property line at that pinch point at the parking adjacent to the building next to Ascension Drive. Is that permitted? I guess that's not really a building, but that's still quite a substantial structure right by the property line.
Correct. Yeah, the required 15-foot setbacks would only apply to the building itself. Other site features, I believe, are allowed for the most part in that setback. I think part of that would probably relate more to like the landscape buffer. They're asking for a technical modification for because elements like parking and retainage are not allowed in that buffer. So it's kind of related to your question. So those, if that was a proposed landscape buffer that they were trying to meet the code, specifically, those elements would not be allowed in that buffer. Since they're asking for that to be waived, they're proposing these elements as part of their site design in that area where the buffer would be. Otherwise, there's not really any code restrictions on the presence of those elements adjacent to the property line, as far as I know.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Can you speak more to the sidewalk plan from the city and like how far out is that?
Sure.
Because I'm just wondering, and like what side of the street is that plan on for New Leicester Highway?
Correct. So I believe what's being proposed is a 5-foot wide sidewalk for a portion of the highway. I don't know the exact extent of it off the top of my head. I know it covers the section in front of the site, including on this side of the highway. I believe it covers both sides of the highway as well, but it certainly would be located along this property here. One of the requirements for a project to be allowed to pay fee in lieu in the first place is that a project is funded and planned to be under construction with, I believe, 2 years of the permitting for a project. So I did double check with folks in transportation that the project does qualify for that fee in lieu based on that criteria. So it would be within about 2 years, at least, of the project being permitted, which could be sooner.
My thought is that the closest bus stop that we're using for this is a quarter of a mile away, and if there's no sidewalk for them to walk to, then what's the point of putting that in here?
Yep.
And then in the TRC staff report, they also asked to provide a peak hour trip generation for this. Have you guys got that yet?
I believe so. I have not seen that myself, but I believe that would be based on whether the project would need to provide a traffic impact study or not. And my understanding is that that kind of study would not be required, so I believe that detail has been worked out. If it hasn't been worked out yet, it would be worked out for the final TRC review step. But as of now, I believe no impact study is required for this project, as it doesn't meet the threshold for the amount of traffic generated per hour.
Actually, to answer your question somewhat more, Ms. Bubenik, I just pulled up some notes from Multimodal Transit today and the project list and the New Leicester Highway sidewalks. It's not, unfortunately, this little list here is not giving me the limits. It started at Patton Avenue, which makes sense. It doesn't say where it's ending. But it was funded. It was supposed to have started this year. So, I mean, but it's been funded, which means that the money is there.
Yeah.
So that's good. It's not like it's in the bottom of the list. And in fact, actually on this list, it's the top one. So,
Right.
I mean, that's good.
It's not just a line on the map. It has funding attached to it, so it will be happening.
Yes, exactly.
Yep.
So, yeah, so that is a good one, too. So, okay. Go ahead.
I've got just a follow-up question on the parking. It does, appear that as presented, the applicant's meeting the parking requirement of the baseline zoning. I'm curious, since this is a conditional zoning, why include a parking minimum at all? And the reason for that is, what's the purpose of a parking minimum for this particular project? I can understand in some cases we might want to prevent, say, overflow parking and having an incursion on a neighboring residential area.
Yep.
For this one, it almost feels like if there are site constraints that would be solved by a further reduction in parking, maybe we should provide that flexibility to the developer without coming back for approval of a lower parking ratio.
Right. Yeah, typically, and I agree with the sentiment for sure. One could argue whether parking minimums are even necessary, given the vision that the city has outlined in the comprehensive plan and other documents. So the value of minimum parking can be debated. I believe we put the minimum in there in the project conditions to show that the required code will be satisfied, so it doesn't become a technical modification, something that applicants typically try to minimize, since parking can be a kind of contentious issue, especially for new development projects. I think we provided them some flexibility by stating the minimum number as what's required, and therefore that gives them some flexibility to reduce the impact of that parking in the site design and have a better overall design site. My understanding is that the applicant would not be, is not seeking a technical modification for the minimum number of parking. So that's why that minimum is kind of the threshold that we've been going with, because that is what's required in the code. The applicant wanted to seek a technical modification. That'd be something that we could talk about, and it could be supported. That's kind of the rationale behind some of that.
Thank you.
If there's no other questions right now, let's go ahead and hear from the applicant. Maybe they can address some of these things. I see Mr. Sugg and Mr. Allen, so.
Good evening, Derek Allen, and I'm with Allen Stahl and Kilborn. I represent the developer on this, and we do have Warren Sugg from the engineer Civil Design Concepts here, as well as Clark Mills, who's the development director at Cohen Esri, to answer any kind of design questions. I think you're right, most of the questions were really directed towards the technical parts of this project, which would be Mr. Sugg. I did want to follow up on Mr. Barton's question, and Will and I have been talking about this, and Janice and Brad Branham as well, on maybe re-looking at what we include in as conditions. I think things that are already set out in the ordinance don't have any real place in the conditions because they end up being confusing. If you are going above and beyond what's in the ordinance, I think that's a proper condition, or if you're asking for a technical modification, I think that's a condition. But to include things like you have to get a sign or you have to comply with the lighting ordinance that you already have to do, I think that just makes it cumbersome and brings up questions like that. So I think that's a good point. Mr. Palmquist's presentation really sets out what this is about. It's a pretty straightforward project. I did want to add in that we are in the LUIGE process as well right now for this project. It qualifies for 90 points based off of the affordability and the commitment to that. The rental assistance, homeless by name is one of the things on this project. The location also add to that. And I do like the fact that this is designated as senior living. That's something that we're missing in that marketplace. So that's something that's a nice add-on with this particular project. We've worked with staff on the conditions and the engineers and other reporting staff on conditions to make sure it's tidy as we go through. It's lined up to go forward through both HRC and finance on the LUIGE, being on, I think, a February City Council agenda, assuming we move forward past this process. If there are any questions that are more geared towards conditions, I'm happy to answer those. I think the technical questions are properly directed to Mr. Sugg, and I would defer to him on those.
I have one question, Mr. Allen, and this is just, I haven't actually seen this in a while. The last one about the conditional zoning being valid for 5 years. I know we've tried to steer back from that. I didn't know if there was any extenuating circumstances why you all were asking for that length.
Just the market now, and that's what we've been talking about with Will and Brad and folks on that. We're seeing a softening of that, and whether it's 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, I don't know that it matters. I do have a follow-up discussion that Ms. Ashley and I need to have on the expiration of those and how it works, and I've got a good example for you. I don't think that's neither here nor there for this board, but City Council has been regularly approving that 60-month, and I think that's with an eye towards the current lending market right now, because we don't want to have to come back if projects get stuck like they did in the mid-2000s.
Yeah, I've noticed that they got shorter and now they're back, and that's my assumption. I'm just curious. Thank you.
Thank you. Good question.
Mr. Allen, you were mentioning that condition, which is confusing. Were you saying you don't think it really should be in there, the minimum parking, since it meets the technical requirement?
Yes.
Yeah, I kind of was looking at it myself saying, I understand maximum if you're, asking for more than would be, and the minimum if we're trying to get, but if it meets it, we don't typically. So I
Yeah.
would agree if you think
Agreed,
it's
yeah.
confusing, if you all think it's confusing and not necessary, that shouldn't probably be in there as a condition. I was also thinking that the fee in lieu should be in there as a condition, even though it's not something the board can decide yes or no. It's when you look at a site plan, years down the line, you say, hey, how come they didn't build a sidewalk? The staff report will be separate and the conditions are what goes with it. So I think adding that in, saying they're paying a fee in lieu because the city is doing the sidewalk along. Because I assume your site plan is not going to show.
And that one wouldn't bother me, although I would say that one's probably already in there because you have to comply with the TRC report and the recommendations in there, and that's going to be in there, so.
It's good clarification.
Yeah, that one doesn't concern me.
You just did.
Yeah, and this is the perfect project for that fee in lieu. I mean, this really is, like, this is what it's designed for. Some of the other ones, I know Ms. Bubenick has brought them up on other projects. I'm like, yeah, that's a pretty good observation, but here, like, this is what it's for.
The thing I was focusing on with the parking one on here is that it's, the condition is listing slightly more than the minimum, as opposed to, if it wasn't in there, they could do the minimum and it would be fine. This is kind of, in a sense, imposing a higher minimum, which I don't think we need to do in this case.
think it
It's
should
at the
be set-
minimum. It is set at the minimum.
It should be set to the minimum, 141.
Okay.
It was recently updated as a couple days ago. so
Okay, maybe that's, this one says,
Mine says
okay.
150.
Yeah, it says 155 on the one I pulled, so.
That's Will's
that was
fault.
the only
Mine says 141.
one. Oh, okay, well.
Mine says 141.
That's weird.
Yeah, in that case, yes, I think then striking condition 7 makes all kinds of sense. Like, there's just no reason for it to be there.
Or maybe, no, maybe it's not updated.
Mine says 155. total.
Okay, it should have been updated, so.
Yeah.
Okay, so that
we
was
can
the
make
other thing that was
sure
confusing.
That gets updated then,
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
Well, I mean, I think, as part of this approval, we're just saying we're striking condition 7.
Yeah, and we work pretty well back and forth on fixing those before they get to council.
Yeah.
Taking into consideration what you guys say, so thank you.
Yep.
I've got a question for you or your client. Just curious how senior is defined by you all?
55 and older.
Okay.
55 in order for the microphone.
Thank you.
I think the version linked to the staff report says 141, but the Exhibit E that's uploaded separately
Yeah.
says the old one, so my
Yeah.
apologies.
That's okay. Okay, yeah, why don't we go ahead and hear from
Thank you.
Mr.
Warren?
Sugg about the more technical aspects.
55 and older is getting closer and closer to some of us.
It's a lot closer in the last week for me, yeah. Let's see, in 5 years, no problem. Where's the application?
Warren Sugg, Civil Design Concepts, for those that need me on the record. Available for any questions you've got. I've written down most of what I heard from you all, so I'm happy to field whatever you've got. I think we've kind of talked through the site plan pretty extensively, so just welcome anything I can clear up for y'all.
I guess the one, and I do realize it'll be part of the TRC final, the landscaping along that retaining wall. Normally it shows up on the site plans, and it didn't on this. And again, I didn't see the ask for it to not be on there, so it was that, question.
Yeah, we'll certainly comply. It is kind of a gray area of a CZ. It's
Yeah.
pretty early on schematic. So totally recognize that there is code there for height of wall, decorative wall, planting in front of it, vines. Being that this is and I'm going to nerd out for just a minute, since this is a cut wall and it's a wall that's very close to property lines and sewer line, it's going to be kind of a top-down construction. It's not going to be grid and block from the bottom up. So hence, it's probably going to be like a H-pile or potentially maybe even a soil nail type wall, although those grid nails might get a little bit too long. So I'm telling you all that nerdy stuff to say that it will either have a decorative face to it to meet the city's code for aesthetically pleasing, or we'll have to do some sort of vine. We just physically don't have the room to go and put an actual shrub and tree planting in front of it.
Okay.
Oh, I love the nerdy stuff. That's,
Yeah. I try to keep it in check.
don't stop. All right.
And I guess one too, just to think about, I know Commissioner Faircloth brought it up, you know, the entrances, because I would expect to see an entrance on the end, or exit, not entrance, exits on the end, fire exits. And then again, on the plan, not really seeing sidewalks in that area of dispersal off of those, but again, that's
So a little bit.
technical TRC. so-
Yeah, a little bit of history. Ascension Drive is a private drive. So this site plan has been through many iterations to get to where it is. And we had approached the owner of Ascension to see if there would be abilities to tie into that. And we were told no.
Yeah.
So we have somewhat limited amount of places where we can make connections. This is an existing driveway. So we'll certainly still have to talk to DOT about the driveway permit, even though there's still a driveway
Yeah.
there. But this is the spot, getting out of the curve, away from other signalized intersections that everybody seemed to kind of agree is the best spot to enter and exit. And we do have circulation. I know there was some talk about fire a moment ago. We've got really good circulation inside of the parking field, which is always kind of desired by the fire department. And then that last leg to the north, we're keeping that under a length at which we would have to have a turnaround at the end, which would then affect more of the stream buffer, more of the open space, more of the tree canopy. So we're trying to be very smart with the design.
Right, and I understand that, and my concern wasn't the access from the road for emergency vehicles, it was from the building to get outside. And I know it's just a schematic plan, we don't have it all there yet, but one lobby entrance and exit for a large building, a senior home building who aren't super mobile people,
Right.
they might not be able to run 200 feet downstairs because the elevator is out in the fire emergency. I mean, that's a pretty long fire escape plan. So the site plan looks good to me. It was from the building to the parking lot.
Right,
That was-
architectural and building safety. And I'm going to have to refer to them. The architect's not here tonight, but it'll be on the record. I'll make sure that we
Yeah.
talk about it some more. I'm going to have to rely on them, city building safety, and just everybody to know what's code
I
and
just
then
want to
what makes.
clarify that the mobility in the parking lot wasn't a concern to me. It was the building.
sorry about
to
that.
the- No, it's okay.
I
just
nerded
wanted to
out
make sure
again.
I was clear.
Yeah, and in particular, I think it's, so the screen I'm looking at towards the left, well, it would be for you as well, like, there's definitely gonna be a stair, well, there may not be a stair, but there's gonna be a fire exit out of there, and I would expect that to see sidewalk area dispersal, so not seeing that on there, Again, that's a TRC, final TRC will deal with that, but there might be a little bit of change there. So,
Understood.
any other?
Thank you, Mr. Sugg. Since the architect's not here, let's pick on them a little bit more. Can we
good.
talk about those windowless side elevations? The side elevations are going to be really visible on this building, particularly the one facing your drive entrance. I'm not proposing this as a condition, but as you develop the plans for the building, I think looking at that elevation again
Right.
with an idea about how visible that'll be might.
Yeah, that makes
Might be
sense. As
worth
you're
it.
going up and down New Leicester, just trying to put something there that puts a little interest to it.
And make your corner units a little more marketable.
There's gonna have to be a door there to get out, I can tell you that right now. So there'll at least be one window. Unless it's a total steel fire.
The other comment I had, and I can't take credit because I think Joe or Kim mentioned it, was the dumpster location on the shoehorn. I mean, I get that that's where it needs to be, but could it, that's a big truck and a little, I think as Joe said, a 100-point turn or something like that. I mean, I'd love to see that angled a little differently. I mean, I know it's hard to fit in there, but
We'll see what we
We need
can,
like a little digital
Yeah.
truck that we can drive on.
I mean, I don't think it's
See
a
if it
bad
works.
location. I just think if it could be turned straight one way or the other, maybe it might help.
yeah, we could maybe try to take that and spin it a little counterclockwise a bit. We won't be able to get it all the way.
It just looks like it isn't gonna work to me, but I don't drive a 30-foot waste truck, but I'm thinking, looks pretty tight.
Right. Yeah, and there's a lot going on there with grade and drainage and everything else,
Right.
but we'll look to see what we can do to better it.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, thank you.
Thank you all.
Would anybody like to make a motion?
Public comment?
Oh. I try all the time, don't I? Not intentionally, just. We will open for public comment at 6:01. Seeing no public comment, we will close. Or no one coming up for public comment, we will close at 6:01. Okay.
I'd like to make a motion. A motion to approve the conditional zoning request for the property located at 157 and 9999 New Leicester Highway from residential multifamily high density RM16 and highway business HB to residential expansion, conditional zone RES EXP-CZ, and find that the request is reasonable, is in the public interest, is consistent with the city's comprehensive plan, and meets the development needs of the community, and that the request, 1, provides infill development in targeted growth areas, 2, increases the supply of affordable housing in proximity to schools and transit and parks, and 3, promotes the development and availability of affordable and workforce housing.
Second.
Before we do the vote, do we need to note that we are striking condition number 7 about the parking?
Yes, and
Okay.
you're going to be adding the condition regarding the fee in lieu.
Okay, so,
So just revising the
Yep.
conditions as we've discussed.
yep. So I am going to amend your motion to state that we are also striking item number 7 or line number 7 on Exhibit E, project conditions related to minimum parking, and we will be replacing it with the mention of the sidewalk fee in lieu.
Approved, seconded.
Thank you. All right, so we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Sugg, Mr. Allen, and I forgot your name. Thank you, Mr. Mills.
Thank you.
That concludes this evening's and this year's batch of Planning and Zoning Commission meetings. The next meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission will be on January 4th, 2023. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion.
I'd like to.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Everybody have a great holiday. Thank you all.
Are you?